Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here to rank all of the eyeshadow palettes that I tried in 2022. I have 15 with you to share with you today. I'm gonna go through them from the lowest ranking to the highest ranking, and yeah, just talk through what I thought of all the palettes I tried in 2022. These are not used palettes that came out in 2022, they're just the ones that I tried for the first time in 2022. So I'm gonna jump into the video, but before I do so, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So the first palette in 15th place is one that I got from my friend Martina. I actually got this end of 2021. I usually count palettes that came in like December time into the next year's kind of palettes because I don't really get a chance to try them in December, so that's what happened with this one and a few more in this ranking. But the palette that came in 15th spot is the Fluttered By palette. This one I have actually declared from my collection because I have better mauve tone palette in my collection now. I'm really grateful that she gifted this to me, or she got it declared from her collection and gave it to me, but I just feel like the tones are just a little bit kind of off for me, and again I have better things that I've tried, and that is why this one comes in at number 15. In place number 14 we have a palette that now I kind of see as my least favorite palette in my collection. I still really like it, otherwise I wouldn't keep it in my collection, but it's just now the palette that I like the least. And you might already know which one this is, but this is the Book of Magic palette from Beauty Bay. I picked this one up from eBay because it was discontinued. Like a lot of Beauty Bay's palettes in this format, they discontinued them relatively quickly, and this one I was so smitten by. I just couldn't get it out of my head and I wanted to pick it up, so I decided to get it from eBay, and it was basically brand new when I did get it. So I have since given this palette some nice love, and I do still like it, like I said, but it's just that there's a lot of things that I would change about this palette. There's a lot of kind of blues, which I do find blues are kind of like, at least this kind of tones are unique to my collection. I don't have too many blues, so I mean it gives something new to my collection. But I also have a lot of these kind of turquoisey shades which aren't my favorites. It also has a lot of really deep shades, like this black with shimmer, this really deep blue, this deep purple, and they are nice, but I just don't reach for those shades very often. I don't really go for super smoky looks, so that's kind of why this comes in at number 14. In 13th spot we have the other palette I got from my friend Martina at the same time as Fluttered By, and that is the At First Sight palette. This one I do really like. I love the color story of this one, and I wish this was ranking higher. I think I could have ranked this higher, but the only reason why I put it in this position is because I barely reached for this one last year. I think I reached for like maybe 1 or 2 shades, which is terrible. So I definitely want to reach for this one this year and play around with it more, but I just could not rank this higher than this because I did not reach for the shades in here. If I played around with it more, I'm sure that I would have ranked this higher on the list, but again I just didn't give this one enough of a chance last year, so it's definitely in the back of my head to reach for more in 2023 and show some more love. So for number 12 we have an Odin's Eye palette. I picked these up for Black Friday in 2021, so again I got these in December, but I didn't try them for the first time in 2022. But this one here is the Red Dragon palette, which I love the color story of. Again, in theory these tones are exactly what I love. However, I just don't reach for this palette very often. I talk about this all the time, and if you watch all my videos, I'm gonna sound like a broken record to you, but you know, they have special shimmers, they have like a multichrome, some duochromes, and these kind of murky greens which I love, like a mustard shade. These shades like on the bottom row, I said before that I could definitely go without. It isn't my favorite palette, however the color story is beautiful, and like when I look at it, every time I look at it I was like, oh my god, I should reach for this palette more. But again, I couldn't rank this higher because I barely reached for it last year, and you can see like this palette looks almost brand new, although I've had it for just over a year. For 11th spot we actually have my second Odin's Eye palette. This is the Elva palette, which is one of their older palettes, but this one looks like this. This is another one that is a mauve tone palette, and this is one that I see like way better than the Fluttered By. It's one of the reasons why I declared it Fluttered By, because this one has those tones, but it also has like a few varieties to it. Like it has more kind of pinky mauves, more kind of brownie mauves, like, you know, like rusty mauves I would say. We also have these kind of pop of warmer shades down here, and I just again think this palette just gives more variety, and I do really like this one. I think at this point we're getting into palettes that I do quite enjoy, and it's one that again I want to play around with more. I'm gonna make a note to reach for this one more now in winter to spring, because I feel like that's when this kind of color story is in its prime. so that comes in at number 11. For 10th spot, we have another Beauty Bay palette, and this is the Wilderness palette. This one is almost like a rainbow palette. It looks like this. You can see I have a lot of pans in here, a lot of love to this palette, and it was because it was my product level up level 5 palette, so I used this a lot last year, and I do really love this palette. It's not my absolute favorite Beauty Bay palette though. I think a lot of people really love this one, and I can see why. These tones are just, I don't know, right now I'm not into super bright eyeshadows like this. I want more kind of soft things. Like today I went for a colorful look, but it's more kind of soft colorful, if that makes sense. The formula, like for the shimmers in here, is very good though. I feel like with Beauty Bay, some of their shimmers are very, very stunning, very like sparkly, very metallic, intense. Some of them are more kind of satiny and not very intense, and I feel like every single shimmer in here is really good, apart from the shade Heat, which is down here. So I do see the love for this palette, and I do see the appreciation and beauty in this color story, but yeah, it's not my favorite, and that's kind of why it's coming in somewhere in the middle. In spot number 9, we have a Sydney Grace palette. This is the California Coast palette, which is like a neutral cool tone palette. It looks like this. I got this last July in the Christmas in July sale, and this was like a free gift for purchase, and I loved the tones that are in here. They're very unique. They have like some grey kind of to them, and they're very, I don't know, it's like sandy tones, kind of pinky, super stunning. I love them. The reason why I'm not ranking this one higher, because the formula is impeccable, it's so good, but for me these kind of shimmer shades here are very deep, and the palette goes very deep, which would be really good for some people, but for me it just, again, I go for lighter looks. But this palette is very unique to my collection, even though it is a neutral palette, which is why I really like it, because like these days when I have so many palettes, I've gone through so many palettes in my collection, it's hard to find a neutral palette that is still unique for me. Next up we have a smaller palette. This is the Natasha Denona Mini Retro palette. This is the first kind of mini palette I've tried from Natasha Denona, and it's like the main one that I wanted to try. I really like this. Again, it has some unique tones. These are more kind of the tones that I'm into right now, like the soft romantic type of tones. I haven't actually done a look with all of these shades together, and I want to try that out this year, but I did really enjoy when I incorporated these shades into other looks, and the formula is really good, and I just think this color story is amazing, especially with it being such a small palette. I think she did such a good job creating such a cohesive but still unique color story. So this one comes in the next spot. So in spot number 7, we have one of my Pat McGrath's palette. This is the one in Divine Rose 1, and I picked this one up late last year. I got it like in the beginning of November, I think. So that's kind of like the cutoff date. Like if I get it like first half November, and I do count it into last year's palette, but if I got anything like end of November, December, I'm gonna count them into this year. So this is like the cutoff date where I got some palettes, and this one I think is beautiful. Again, it's more of a mauve tone. I did get quite a few mauve tones palette last year, because I didn't have many in my collection, and that's initially why I took on the Flooded by palette from my friend Martina. But with this palette, it's just stunning. It has so many different like tones to it, and these special shades here are absolutely stunning. I want to play around with this palette more. I have used every single shade in it, played with it a couple of times, but I want to play with them some more. Again, it's very brand new to my collection. I've only had it for like what, 2-3 months. But I think it's beautiful. I think it's, if you're into these kind of tones, like mauve tones, cool tones, 100% recommend this one. It's such a nice quality one, and it has those sparkly shades which I like. And this shade down here is probably one of my favorites. It's like super sparkly. I don't know if you can pick that up on camera, but it's like wet looking, very, very nice. And yeah, I love this palette. Then just above that we have my other Pat McGrath palette. I got in the same round, so I got 2 Pat McGrath palettes at the same time. I got them when she had a sale going. If you spent like a certain amount, you got I think it was like 35% off, and yeah, I bought these 2 then. It's just like a build your own kit as well, so I saved even more doing that with these 2 palettes. But this is the Bronze Seduction palette, and this is one that I've been wanting for such a long time. This isn't my first Pat McGrath palette. I did have the Utopian Dream from before, and this one and Utopian Dream were the 2 that I was picking between when I wanted to pick up my first one. So I'm really happy that I have this in my collection. I'm sure that if I had this for longer last year, this might have ranked higher, because this color story is just so perfect, and it's a perfect kind of everyday palette. Again, it has some really sparkly shade. The most sparkly shade in here is this shade here, which is like a iridescent shade. It has like a really strong gold to green shift to it. This one here is also duochrome. It's very similar to like the electric shade in the Subculture palette, but it's way more intense and just very sparkly. And then yeah, it has a few more special shades plus these beautiful neutral tones to match them with. So I love this palette. I'm very excited to play around it more this year. So we come to the top 5 now, and 5th spot we have the Mountain Trail palette from Sydney Grace. I just think this palette is stunning. These are kind of the type of greens that I love wearing. These are almost neutral tones to me. It has these kind of beautiful neutral shades that are just like the perfect complement to green. We have some mustardy Canadian shades. We have these kind of browny greens down here, and they're just stunning. The kind of shades that I don't love in here is Rustic and To Earth. Those two are just, I don't know, I just feel like they're too satiny and a bit too deep for what I like, but I can understand why they're in here. But overall, I just love this palette, and I love every look that I get with this. It gives very much like green but neutral to me, like I said before. And I'm super excited to play around with this palette more next year, or this year I guess. So in 4th place we have a palette that I'm actually wearing partly on my eyes today, and that is the last Beauty Bay palette on this list, and it is the Love Nose palette. There's just something about this palette that I absolutely love. It's very light toned, which I have mentioned before. I'm more into right now especially, and it has beautiful shimmers. Again, every single shimmer in here is very stunning. I feel like the shimmers in here are even better than the Wilderness palette. I don't feel like there's any duds, and you have so much variety in like lighter tones, like crease colors, everything like that. On my eyes today, by the way, I'm wearing Spark, Glove, and Princess. So those 3 shades here I'm wearing on my eyes today, and I just love this palette overall. It's very stunning, and I can't wait to play around with this more again this year. I don't feel like this palette is for everyone, and if you don't like light eyeshadow looks, I wouldn't recommend this, because that's kind of what you get out of this, which you can see with the depths. You don't really have much depth. You have these 2 shades here which are a bit deeper in this brown, but they're not super deep on the eyes. So if you like deep eyeshadow looks, this is not for you, but I love this palette. Next you go. Mummy, you have 3 palettes left to talk about.
3?
It's 3?
3!
But it's only 3 out of 15. I know, you can sigh at me. I'm almost done, baby. So we've come to my top 3, and in 3rd place we have my last Pat McGrath palette. This is the one that I mentioned before. This is the Utopian Dream. I had more time to play around with this one. Obviously this is the palette that I've used the most out of all 3, which might be why it's ranking higher, because I have more experience with this one. But I just love these shades. I love kind of, again, these pinky tones. This shade here, which isn't even one of her special shades in the palette, but it's so stunning. It's like a pink to gold kind of sparkly shade. It's not as sparkly as her special shadows, but it's still very nice. And then you have these 2 shades on the end, which are spectacular. They're so good, and yeah, I just love this palette very much. And even though I think this again might not be for everyone, I think a lot of people when this came out was expecting more from it, because it is very similar to a lot of her other palettes. Like, she does these kind of mattes and, you know, the gold and all of that in like a lot of her palettes. So it's very repetitive if you have all of her other palettes. But again, this was my first Pat McGrath palette. It was my first experience with her brand, and I just fell in love with this palette. It's very good, like I said. The only shade that I'm not really loving at the moment is this shade here, but it's just because I'm a bit tired of these shades. I've used a lot of similar shades last year. I tried to pan Bloom in this Sultry palette, which is very similar, so I'm a bit fed up with those shades. But I think once I get out of that kind of feeling, I will love that shade as well, because it definitely goes with the palette and it creates really nice warm looks. And yeah, I love this palette very much. It's definitely my favorite Pat McGrath palette at the moment, but once I play with the other 2, my ranking might change. In 2nd spot we have a relatively new palette to me actually, and I just realized maybe I should count this into next year's palette, but I have played around with it a lot since I got it, and that's why I'm putting it into this ranking. Because it's actually something I got for my birthday, which is end of November, so again, I should have maybe gone into this year's ranking, but I love this palette. This is the Natasha Denona Bronze palette. I got this from my boyfriend, and yeah, it's just stunning. Every single look I've gotten from this palette I love. It gets really kind of like sexy, bronzy, warm toned, like cozy eye looks, and I love it. I said this before, but I can't wait to have this palette like in summer for, like, you know, going out looks, like dinner time, nighttime looks in summer when you're a bit tanned as well. And also like doing it like autumn looks with this palette. I think this is going to be amazing. The only thing with this palette is that it is very monotone. It has a lot of like similar shades. I wouldn't say any shades are exactly the same, although some are very similar. Like these 2 down here are relatively similar, one is slightly deeper. Even these 3 are very similar. And this one though has a bit of a shift. I mean, on camera they look similar, but I don't know if you can see, but it has like a pink base. But there is a lot of similarities. However, I just think this palette is amazing. I love it. It might just be because it's very new to my collection, but yeah, I'm so happy to have this in my collection. And also, I just realized this is my 2022 birthday present from my boyfriend, and this Utopian Dream, which was the third place, is my 2021 birthday present from my boyfriend. So he's done good, although I mean I might have been hinting what I wanted, but he still did very good and I'm very grateful. But that comes in second place. And then in first place, we have a palette that wasn't even supposed to be in my collection, but I'm so grateful that I have. And that is the Rose Quartz palette from Huda Beauty. So this palette was actually supposed to be a birthday present for my friend Martina last year. Her birthday is very early in January. So I picked this up for her because I was sure she didn't have this in her collection. And then when I was going to give this to her, I realized she already had this in her collection. So I ended up with a spare, and I mean, it is a beautiful color story, so I decided I'm going to keep it. I didn't need another palette, but I'm going to keep it, and I'm so happy that happened because this is my favorite palette of 2022. The shades in here, I mean, this is again a kind of mauve tone, cool tone palette, but it's very unique to me, and the tones in here are very unique. It has a lot of kind of grey tones that are still mauve leaning, which are the most flattering greys that I found, especially on me. You also have a lot of kind of really sparkly shades, like this shade here is very sparkly, so is this one too, this one as well. There's a lot of different textures, a lot of different you know, very special shades, and you have a lot of variety with what is in here. I think this is an amazing palette. I think it's very well made. I think the quality is like, it's absolutely there. It's 100% my favorite Huda Beauty palette. A lot of people love the Mercury Retrograde palette, but this one for me is like way up there compared to that one. And yeah, I love this palette. I talked about it so many times, but I think it's just probably one of the best palettes like overall that I've tried, both with quality and color story and just uniqueness. And yeah, I think it's a really nice one. So that is the one that comes in number 1. And yeah, I'm very excited to play around with this one again. I need to pull this one out soon because we are in winter and I feel like this is a very wintry palette. So I'm gonna make a mental note, maybe I'll reach for this one tomorrow. But yeah, that is number 1. So with that, I'm gonna wrap up my ranking of my 2022 palettes. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Let me know down below which your favorite palette was that you tried in 2022. Give me like your top 3 of what you tried last year. I am an eye no buy, so it might not be helpful, but I'm still interested to find out. And I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys.